Greetings, comrades. Alright, today's video is Europe surrenders to Donald Trump. Before starting on the main topic of the channel's video, I really want to thank you who helped maintain and improve our channel through Apoyase. Your support is fundamental for us to continue our work. If you prefer pics, it's appearing here as a QR code on the video screen. Comrades, note, I promised that this week we would make a series of videos dedicated to Donald Trump's offensive against Brazil and the risk of the massive tariffs that will come into effect on August 1st. It's important to also understand this global context. The agreement between the European Union and the United States was closed. An agreement, right? Pardon my language, right? Here in Recife, we call it a heads, I win tails, you lose agreement, right? And you can find out what that means. It's an agreement in which only one of the parties wins. And so, basically, in this agreement, products exported from the European Union to the United States will be taxed at 15%. It will drop the taxation on various American products entering the European market. And the European Union is also obligated to invest in the United States more than $600 billion, which, according to statements from EU leaders, would be private and not public investments. But that's not very clear. Of course, it isn't, right? This agreement needs to be ratified by all member states of the European Union. But it's a gigantic capitulation. And so, no. The United States' big issue isn't with trade inequality with various countries around the world. The United States' big problem is with China. This here is a dispute between the United States and China. China today is the world's largest producer of manufactured goods. China is, concretely, the world's factory. And China is competing with the United States for leadership, global technological leadership of the next technological frontier of the global economy, the fourth industrial revolution, or the fifth if you prefer. It depends on the author's preference. Anyway, that's it. And China also has the capacity to induce de-dollarized economic transactions and offer alternatives to the dollar system, to the US-controlled SWIFT, to the financing mechanisms controlled by the United States, the IMF, the World Bank, and also reconfigure the world's economic geography through large infrastructure works that are synthesized in the new Silk Road. A real dispute, in fact, between China and the United States. As we've been saying here on the channel since the beginning of the Trump administration, tariffs are not going to make the United States win this dispute against China. It's not going to happen. No, and good. It's not going to happen. But, the tariffs can be an important weapon for two things. First, for Trump to reinforce for his domestic base a sense of imperial pride that the United States still rules the world, including threatening other countries that the price of getting closer to China, getting closer to the new Silk Road, getting closer to a de-dollarized trade is very high. So it gives a response to his domestic base. And also to blackmail other countries into remaining faithful to Washington's dictates and at the same time, concomitantly, to have some immediate economic gains. Look, I don't think any tariff will cause the reindustrialization of the United States, but undeniably, these rounds of tariff hikes and the subsequent negotiations are yielding positive results for the US economy, which, in the medium term, may even result in some industrial job growth, perhaps economic activity growth. We'll have to see. To see the process of managing, of implementing this, but this will not give the United States better capabilities to face China because that's what this is about. And in fact, in some dimensions, this even strengthens China's strategic position. Why? China's big argument is that China doesn't interfere in the business of its partner countries. China doesn't want hegemony. In fact, this is said openly by the Chinese, that China doesn't want to take the United States' place, that China wants that place to cease to exist, the place of a superpower that rules the world. that China doesn't want hegemony, that China wants a shared destiny, that each country chooses its own path of development, that it's a win win relationship. So, the idea that China is a more reliable partner, it's a more stable partner, it's a more beneficial partner than the United States, ends up being reinforced by Trump's own behavior. There's an element here. Yes, Trump's move reinforces the idea that China is indeed more stable, more reliable, a safer source of investment, trade relations, and strategic partnerships than the United States is, with everything Trump is doing. At the same time, however, this move by the United States reinforces the perception in the world. There's something I find very curious, which is look, the United States shatters once and for all an illusion strong in the 90s from the 80s, which is the illusion of globalization, an illusion that nation states have lost importance and brings to light things that are strategic, but that in day to day life end up going unnoticed. Look, Europe is a military protectorate of the United States. When World War II ends, one of the consequences of World War II is that the countries of Europe lose a leading role they had in the global imperialist order. The global imperialist order, which was multipolar, ceases to be multipolar and becomes unipolar, commanded by the United States. The United States reorganizes the European economy under its command, with its financing, including introducing its consumption patterns. There's a very good article in Opera magazine about the introduction of Coca Cola in Western Europe, written by Gabriel Deslandes. It's well worth reading because it gives kind of an appetizer of what the capitalist reorganization of Europe was after World War II of Western Europe. So, the United States reorganizes Europe in its image and likeness and stuck those damn military bases there, with, of course, a small margin of slightly greater autonomy for the French state within the imperialist scheme. But anyway, Europe is a military protectorate of the United States. Japan is a military protectorate of the United States. South Korea is a military protectorate of the United States. Not surprisingly, not surprisingly, various authors use the category, the term development by invitation to explain the economic development of Japan and South Korea after World War II, saying that these countries, by being military protectorates of the United States, by being in the orbit of Western countries controlled by the United States, due to the fact that there was great pressure from the communist movement in Asia, particularly China, Vietnam, Korea, and India, countries were allowed their industrial development so that Japan and South Korea were able to implement industrial policies. And if it were in Latin America, they would stage a coup d'etat, as they did, by the way, as was the case in Brazil under the government of João Goulart. So, the use of the term development by invitation. So, for a long time, the idea was sustained that you have a democratic capitalist world developed, yeah, free and so on, and the fact that in practice, these countries are military protectorates of the United States. In practice, the United States has the final say on various strategic decisions of the European Union. And then came all this debate, this little chat about globalization, global civil society, nation states, and so on. Before Trump, in fact, Biden had already put this to rest, and now Trump finished it because the great secret of German industrial competitiveness was the low price of energy from imported Russian gas. In practice, Germany was forced to give up Russian gas, which frighteningly increased the cost. Production costs in Germany made it lose its market, including to China, but not only to China, but to the United States as well, Germany. In a colossal economic crisis, Europe swallowed the costs and consequences of the war in Ukraine, which has had gigantic impacts on the continent until now. And now you have In Trump's move, the imposition of this massive tariff and a move to bring Europe into line, including within a logic that you need to increase military spending in NATO. So you have a military apparatus which is commanded by the United States that serves the strategic interest of the United States and that its vassal states, our European states, will have to increase their costs to maintain the apparatus that serves the strategic interests of the United States. So, look, this is a fundamental element here. We are living in a moment of capitalist crisis where the main imperialist power in the world, the United States, has decided that being unable to have a direct confrontation with China at this moment, it will impose losses on its strategic partners, seeking to strengthen itself, seeking to have economic gains, perhaps seeking to have the muscle to try in the future, in the medium, short term, other moves in this war against China, and in practice also threatening various countries, showing that they cannot in any way move away from the logic of the Western world led by the United States. In other words, that classic phrase from Henry Kissinger, which says that being an ally of the United States is very dangerous, it's fatal, proves to be a reality. Look, at this moment, someone will say, Jones, if the European Union surrendered, do you think Brazil has the ability to resist? And look, the European Union is the largest consumer market in the world. In Europe, there are heavyweight industries. Industrial capacity, of course, Europe is going through a process of decline that has to do with a series of factors: outdated infrastructure, population growth, internal conflicts, increased inequality, loss of competitiveness in various sectors to China and other Asian countries. There are a series of problems, but Europe has a gigantic capacity that was not used, and it was not used among other things because the European bourgeoisie, the ruling classes of Europe in its various countries, plus its intellectuals, its political leaders, its formulators, simply do not envision a possibility of standing up to the leadership of the United States. Europe has grown accustomed in recent decades to the possibility of an appearance of shared leadership. This was always an appearance. It's not as if the West is led by the United States, the European Union, and Japan. This was always an appearance because ultimately, the one with the military capacity, the one with the hegemonic currency, the one with the capacity to impose blockades and sanctions on the whole world, the one with more than 800 military bases scattered around the world is the United States. But there's an illusion of shared leadership. The European leaderships simply cannot project a world, project a political path that is not, at this moment, a surrender, given that the appearance of shared leadership no longer seems to be available. So the curtain has been opened. There is no longer the spectacle of the appearance of shared leadership, the fiction of shared leadership of the world, so they have to surrender to the United States. The European Union could indeed have done much more. The European Union could have resisted. The European Union, in fact, could have stood up to the US government and won this battle. Among other things, one of the mistakes they made was to cling to the fiction that we are the West and we will lead the West together with the United States, and they did not seek, for example, coordination with China and with the Russia China axis to stand up to the United States. And they can't do it because a fundamental part of the founding myth of these liberal Westernist elites of the European Union is the idea that Russia is a great danger and that they even need NATO, because it seems Russia is about to take its armies and march to Lisbon, to the island of Madeira, right? Putin will take the armies, he will leave from the Trans-Siberian to the island of Madeira, dominating all of Europe, so NATO is needed. So, what happened on the part of the European ruling class, of its intellectual managers, was the putting on of a straitjacket. They chose to put themselves in a position of defense in which standing up to Trump and seeking strategic partnerships to rebalance the game was not an option. within a logic that we are the West. We want a critical distance from China, and Russia is our enemy. And we need the support of the United States to maintain the war in Ukraine, which is only harmful to Europe. Don't try to bring this surrender of Europe to justify a possible surrender of Brazil. Not today. Europe, it surrendered itself. It is a victim, in fact, of a fundamental myth, which is the myth of shared leadership. That the West, in fact, I learned this in high school, right? I learned this in high school. What is the developed world? Developed world is the United States, Japan, and Europe. So the three of them rule the world, more or less. From the point of view of capital circulation, from the point of view of where the most productive capitals are, from the point of view of where technological innovation is. So, the most powerful financial markets, the most powerful investment funds, that even makes sense. From a political and geopolitical point of view, this was never true. In fact, just a comment here, this is a Marxist to Marxist conversation. Look, I think my Marxist friends and comrades need to rethink, in light of recent events, the idea of an imperialist pyramid. I've never used that because I don't think there is an imperialist pyramid. If by imperialist pyramid I am to understand the imperialist system in its totality, let me explain. There is indeed competition between imperialist capitals. So, German capital, French capital, American capital, Spanish capital, Japanese capital, South Korean capital, and so on, that there are competitions, market disputes, and so on. If by imperialist pyramid you understand the different levels of productivity and organic composition and power of the capitals that compete on the globe, then we can talk. If by imperialist pyramid you understand the totality of the system, as if there were a leading imperialist state, which is the United States, and semi leading states. The United States leads, but then in power comes the United Kingdom, which has an atomic bomb, and comes France, which has an atomic bomb, and comes Germany, which has a powerful industrial park. Thinking like that, it's as if there were several states leading the imperialist system, but you have a leader that is stronger. Let's imagine. If it's that, I think it's wrong. For me, it's very clear. The one who directs the superstructure of the global imperialist system, the one who organizes the reproduction of the global imperialist system, is the United States, and all the other countries, they are subordinate politically, militarily, and in serious moments, as we are seeing now, economically too. The leadership of US imperialism. So, if you are to think of the imperialist system as a whole, the superstructure base reproducing itself, there is no imperialist pyramid. There is an imperialist axis, and this axis is the United States Israel axis, given the strategic role, in fact, that the Middle East has in the geopolitics of the imperialist system today, the strategic role that Israel has as an advanced point of US imperialism, of neocolonialism in the Middle East, but also subordinate to the United States, by the way. So, you have an imperialist pyramid? No, you have an imperialist axis led by the United States. In that sense, I think Domenico Losurdo is right about the main point. Domenico Losurdo has a thesis that one cannot speak of European imperialism. Hold on. Now, the what is called European imperialism operates in the world with the permission of the United States, and as long as it does not confront the strategic interests of the United States, therefore, ultimately, it is part of a gear mechanism that guarantees the dominance of the United States in the world. That for me is correct. That's it. That's the way the thing works. So I think the cowardice of the European bourgeoisie, I think it reinforces the understanding that we cannot trust the bourgeoisie, not even a tiny bit, as Che Guevara would say, to defend national sovereignty. In the same way that the European bourgeoisie capitulated, the Brazilian bourgeoisie will also want to capitulate. And if the Lula government follows the path it is following at this moment, what is this path? Of trying to confront Trump through a fundamentally bourgeois path. Meeting with the business community, seeking the Brazilian business community affected by the tariffs as the main and strategic interlocutor. The path will be for the Brazilian bourgeoisie to seek surrender just like the European bourgeoisie. And then the future of Brazil could be the same as the European Union's. I think we need to pay close attention to this. And during the week, we will continue this debate and this reflection. That's it, folks. I hope you enjoyed the channel's video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell on this video, share, and all that stuff you already know. A kiss. And until next time.